The Hells Angels biker followed the little girl's screams into an abandoned school, and his wrath echoed for miles. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. The cold wind howled through the empty streets, cutting through the dark of the night. In the distance, faint cries echoed, the sound of desperation rising from the abandoned school. A lone figure, a Hells Angels biker, cruised down the street on his roaring motorcycle, the headlights slicing through the darkness like a knife. His leather jacket and patches told the story of a man who had seen and done it all. But tonight, something was different. As he sped past the school, a piercing scream shattered the stillness of the night. It wasn't the sound of wind or the usual city noises. No, this was the sound of a child in fear. Without a second thought, the biker slammed on the brakes, his tires screeching against the wet asphalt as he turned sharply into the driveway of the crumbling school. The old building loomed ahead, its windows broken, the walls covered in graffiti, and the front door slightly ajar as if inviting trouble. He knew he shouldn't stop. He knew the risks. But the sound of that scream, so raw and full of terror, reached something deep inside him. He couldn't just ride away. The biker parked his Harley-Davidson next to the school, the engine rumbling to a halt. He threw his leg over the bike, his boots hitting the ground with a heavy thud as he surveyed his surroundings. The street was empty, silent once more, as if the world had paused, waiting for the next move. His hand instinctively reached for the worn handle of the knife tucked in his belt, a tool of protection he had carried through countless dangerous situations. He wasn't expecting this. He wasn't expecting to hear the faint cries again, coming from inside the school. With the night wrapping around him, he moved toward the door, his footsteps echoing in the hollow building. His heart pounded, the weight of the situation sinking in. He wasn't just walking into an abandoned building. He was walking into the unknown. Inside, the air was thick with dust, the smell of mold and decay. His eyes adjusted to the darkness as he slowly stepped forward. The cries grew louder, and he followed them, moving cautiously through the wreckage of old classrooms. The walls were cracked, the floors covered in debris, and the ceiling had collapsed in some places. But none of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was the sound of that child's voice, calling out in fear. He turned a corner and froze. There, in the middle of the room, sat a young girl, no older than 7 or 8, her eyes wide with terror. She was huddled in a corner, shaking, her clothes torn and dirty. The biker's heart sank. Without thinking, he rushed to her side, kneeling down in front of her. "Hey, it's okay. You're safe now," he said, his voice low and soothing. The girl looked up at him, her eyes filled with distrust and fear. She didn't know him. He was a stranger, and to her, he looked like another threat. But she was wrong. He wasn't here to hurt her. He was here to protect her. His large, scarred hand reached out slowly, and with a gentleness that surprised even him, he touched her shoulder. "I'm not going to hurt you. Let me help you." The girl hesitated for a moment. Then, as if sensing the sincerity in his voice, she nodded, her body still trembling. As he helped her to her feet, the biker glanced around the room, his instincts on high alert. He couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. His eyes scanned the darkness, but there was no sign of anyone else. Still, something felt wrong. He carefully guided the girl toward the door, his senses sharp as he listened for any sounds of movement. Just as they reached the doorway, a loud crash echoed from behind them, followed by footsteps. They weren't alone anymore. The biker turned quickly, his heart racing. There, standing in the doorway, were 2 men, their faces obscured by shadows, but their intentions clear. The biker's grip tightened on his knife, ready to defend the girl, no matter the cost. The stakes had just gotten higher. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of heavy breathing, and the biker's wrath began to rise. He would not let these men hurt her. Not tonight. The biker's hand was still gripping the knife as he turned to face the 2 men standing in the doorway. The girl, still shaking, pressed herself closer to him, her eyes wide with fear. The men were silent for a moment, watching him with cold, calculating eyes. The biker didn't move, his senses on high alert as the air thickened with tension. The men took a step forward, one of them sneering at the biker, clearly unimpressed by his presence. "What's this, huh?" one of them said, his voice rough, a mocking tone lacing his words. "You think you can just barge in here and save the little girl? You got no business here." The biker's eyes narrowed as he stood tall, his broad frame blocking the doorway, effectively trapping them inside the school. His hand tightened around the handle of the knife, but he didn't raise it. He knew better than to make the first move. "You don't want to do this," the biker said, his voice calm, almost too calm. He had been in situations like this before, more times than he cared to count. The man in front of him chuckled, taking another step forward. "You're outnumbered, friend. And trust me, you don't want to mess with us. We don't take kindly to people like you. People who think they can play the hero." The biker's gaze flicked to the girl behind him, still huddled in the corner, and then back to the men. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He didn't care about the odds. He cared about her. The girl was terrified, and as much as the biker wanted to act on instinct, he had to think fast. These weren't the kind of men you could reason with. He needed a plan. He took a deep breath, his mind working quickly. "You don't want to hurt her," the biker said, his voice unwavering. "She's just a kid. But if you want to fight, I'll give you a fight." The words hung in the air, heavy with a challenge. The men glanced at each other, unsure of what to make of the biker's calm demeanor. "What are you, some kind of crazy?" the second man asked, his voice suddenly uncertain. The first man sneered, not liking the doubt creeping into his companion's tone. "Shut up, we got this," he muttered, his hand moving toward his pocket. The biker's instincts kicked in just as the man pulled a knife of his own. In an instant, the biker lunged, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it sharply. The knife clattered to the floor as the first man yelped in pain. The second man lunged at the biker, but the biker was faster. With a quick movement, he threw the man against the wall, knocking the wind out of him. The school echoed with the sounds of the struggle, but the biker didn't hesitate. He grabbed the girl's hand, pulling her towards him. "We need to get out of here. Now," he said, his voice firm. The girl nodded, her wide eyes still filled with fear, but now there was a flicker of trust in them. The biker helped her to her feet, guiding her toward the door. As they moved quickly down the hallway, the sounds of the men's groans and curses faded behind them. The biker's heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline coursing through his veins. They reached the door, but before they could escape, they heard it, the sound of footsteps. Someone else was coming. The biker's head snapped toward the sound. "Stay behind me," he told the girl in a low voice. They didn't have much time. He couldn't let anyone else get in their way. The footsteps grew louder, and the biker knew they were running out of options. He glanced over his shoulder, meeting the girl's gaze. "Stay close," he said, his voice rough. They had no choice but to face whoever was coming. The biker's hand was steady on the knife handle, his mind focused. He wasn't going to let anything happen to her. Not tonight. The door creaked open, and a figure appeared in the doorway. It wasn't the two men. This person was different. Taller, more intimidating. The biker's grip tightened. This wasn't over yet. The figure in the doorway loomed larger than life, his silhouette casting an intimidating shadow. The biker's grip tightened around his knife as he instinctively stepped forward, his body blocking the girl from view. Every muscle in his body tensed as the footsteps stopped just inside the door, and the man slowly emerged from the shadows. Unlike the others, this man carried an air of authority. His leather jacket, adorned with a variety of patches, reflected the dim light from the broken windows. He stood tall, easily 6 feet, with a hardened expression that didn't reveal a hint of fear. The biker's eyes narrowed. "Who the hell are you?" The biker growled, his voice low and steady. The man didn't flinch. "I'm the one you've been avoiding," he said, his voice cold, yet smooth. "But it looks like you've got something I want." The biker's heart rate spiked. This wasn't just another thug looking for a fight. This man, this stranger, knew something. And worse, he seemed to know exactly what he was doing. "Not interested in whatever you're selling," the biker shot back, stepping into a defensive stance. The girl, still behind him, was visibly shaking, but she stayed silent, clutching onto the biker's jacket as if her life depended on it. The stranger didn't seem to mind. He just took a slow step forward, his eyes scanning the biker, sizing him up. "You don't get it, do you? The stranger's tone was almost amused, like he was speaking to someone who didn't understand the rules of the game. You think you're protecting her, but you're just a small part of something much bigger. You're not getting away from this. The biker's mind raced as he weighed his options. He wasn't a fool. He had been in enough dangerous situations to know when it was time to fight and when it was time to escape. But something about this felt different. You really think you can scare me? The biker said, forcing the bravado into his voice. The stranger smiled, a thin, predatory grin. No, I don't think I'll scare you. I think you'll see what happens when you try to walk away from me. The man suddenly lunged, faster than the biker anticipated, and in a flash, he grabbed the knife from the biker's hand. The biker immediately tried to counter, but the stranger was already prepared, his grip strong and sure. The girl screamed, her voice high-pitched with panic, but the biker couldn't afford to lose focus. He ducked low, pushing the stranger back with a forceful shove, just enough to give him a few seconds to regain his composure. Run, the biker shouted to the girl, his voice fierce and protective. She hesitated for a split second before her legs finally moved. She darted past the two men, her feet hitting the cracked floor with every desperate step. The biker's eyes followed her, but his focus remained on the stranger, whose expression had now turned into one of pure malice. You should have stayed out of this, the stranger said, his voice dripping with disdain as he pulled a second knife from his belt. The biker wiped the blood from his lip, his eyes still locked on his opponent. This wasn't a fight he could afford to lose. The room felt like it was closing in on him, the walls heavy with the threat of violence. With one swift motion, the biker lunged, tackling the stranger to the ground. The two of them rolled across the floor, their bodies crashing into old desks and broken chairs as they fought for dominance. The biker's fists connected with the man's face, and for a moment, he thought he could end it right there. But the stranger was no amateur. He twisted, kicking the biker off, and both of them scrambled to their feet. You don't know who you're messing with, the stranger spat, wiping the blood from his mouth. I'm not the only one who's coming for you. The biker's mind went into overdrive. He couldn't fight this man forever. His only chance was to get the girl to safety, but he couldn't do that while this man was in the way. The sounds of approaching footsteps echoed down the hallway, and the biker knew that time was running out. He could hear the distant roar of motorcycles starting up, the unmistakable hum of engines that made his stomach drop. Reinforcements were on their way. Listen to me, the biker said through gritted teeth, his voice calm despite the rising danger. Get out of here. Now. The stranger's eyes narrowed as he looked toward the door, his face contorting with rage. I'm not leaving without her, he growled. The biker didn't give him a choice. He made a move to grab the stranger's arm, twisting it with a forceful yank. The man howled in pain, but the biker wasn't done yet. He shoved the stranger back toward the door, sending him stumbling. You want her? You'll have to go through me, the biker said, his voice steady and full of determination. The stranger seethed, but it was clear the biker had gained the upper hand. For now, the sound of the motorcycles outside grew louder, signaling that the battle was far from over. The biker turned to face the girl, who was now crouched near the broken window, her eyes wide with fear. He knew they had no time left. We need to move, he said urgently. But as he started to make his way toward her, a loud crash came from behind him. The door slammed open, and a group of men poured into the room, their footsteps heavy and menacing. The biker's heart raced, and he turned to face them, his mind already formulating a plan to get the girl out of here alive. He wasn't going to let them win. Not now. Not ever. The biker's heart pounded as the door crashed open, revealing a group of men, their faces masked with cold determination. The girl was still at the window, her small body trembling as she watched the situation unfold. The biker knew they had only moments before the chaos consumed them both. He turned to her, his voice low and urgent. Stay down and stay quiet, he said, trying to keep his calm despite the mounting danger. He turned back to face the men. There were 5 of them, all dressed in dark, intimidating clothing, the unmistakable marks of the same group the biker had been avoiding. Each of them carried weapons, and each of them exuded a sense of danger that couldn't be ignored. The leader, the man who had faced off with the biker earlier, stepped forward, his eyes burning with anger. You're not getting out of here alive, the man spat, his voice cold and filled with venom. This girl is ours, and you've already made the mistake of thinking you can stop us." The biker stood his ground, his jaw clenched. "I'm not here to negotiate," he said, his voice steady, though every muscle in his body was ready for action. "I'm here to protect her." The man laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that echoed off the walls of the decaying school. "Protect her? You're out of your league, biker. You have no idea what you're up against." With a swift motion, the leader lunged forward, his knife gleaming in the dim light. The biker was ready. He dodged to the side, narrowly avoiding the blade, and countered with a punch that sent the leader stumbling back. But the momentary victory didn't last. The other men surged forward, attacking all at once. The biker fought with everything he had, his fists moving with brutal precision, his body moving like a well-oiled machine. But there were too many of them. A sharp pain shot through his side as one of the men landed a blow with a crowbar, and he stumbled, but quickly regained his footing. The girl's scream echoed in the air, and for a moment, the biker's focus wavered. That was all it took. One of the men managed to get a solid grip on him, pinning his arm behind his back. He struggled against the hold, his breath coming in quick, shallow gasps, but it was no use. He was outnumbered. The leader moved in, his knife raised, ready to finish what he had started. The biker's mind raced. He needed to get to the girl, to protect her, but with the way things were going, it wasn't looking good. Just as the blade came down, a loud noise interrupted the tension. The sound of motorcycles revving up in the distance, growing louder by the second. The men froze, their eyes darting to the window, and the biker took his chance. With a powerful twist of his body, he broke free from the man holding him, and in a flash, he was on his feet again, his hands reaching for the knife that had fallen to the ground. The leader cursed and took a step back, his face twisting with fury. "This isn't over," he growled, turning to his men. "We'll deal with this later. Get out of here." The men hesitated for a moment, but at the leader's command, they began to retreat, disappearing into the shadows of the abandoned school. The biker didn't chase them. Instead, he ran to the girl, who was still standing by the window, her eyes wide with fear. "Are you okay?" he asked, kneeling down beside her. She nodded, her lips trembling, but her gaze never wavered. "We need to get out of here," the biker said, his voice calm but firm. He grabbed her hand, leading her away from the danger, through the broken hallways of the school. As they reached the door, the sound of the motorcycles grew deafening, and the biker knew that help was coming. His brothers, the ones he hadn't seen in years, were here. The bikers he had once fought alongside were pulling up outside, their engines roaring like thunder, ready to back him up. The girl looked up at him, her expression filled with confusion and gratitude. "Who are they?" she asked. The biker gave her a small smile, his heart still racing. "Friends," he said. The moment the doors burst open, a wave of bikers flooded into the school. The biker recognized the leader of the group immediately, Steele, a man he had once called brother. Steele's eyes locked onto the bikers, a silent understanding passing between them. Without a word, Steele nodded, signaling his men to sweep the area. "You're safe now," Steele said, his voice gravelly but kind. "We've got this." The biker gave a quick nod, turning back to the girl. "You're going to be okay," he assured her, though his mind was already racing with what came next. The sound of the motorcycles outside filled the air, the power of the engines a reminder that the danger wasn't over yet. The girl, though still shaken, seemed to draw strength from the presence of the bikers. As they made their way outside, the biker kept a careful watch on the surrounding area. The danger may have passed for now, but he knew better than to let his guard down. The girl's safety was his responsibility, and he would not rest until she was out of harm's way. As they climbed onto the back of a Harley, the biker looked down at the girl, who was finally starting to relax, the fear in her eyes slowly replaced with something else: hope. The roar of the engines started up again, and they sped off into the night, leaving the abandoned school behind. The biker didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. He wasn't going to let anyone harm her again. The night air was thick with tension as the biker and the girl sped through the empty streets, the roar of the Harley's engine filling the silence. The world outside seemed distant, fading away as they navigated the winding roads. The girl, still clutching tightly to the biker, was quieter now, her body no longer trembling as violently as it had before. She was still scared, but the presence of the biker, The comforting sound of the motorcycles behind them seemed to give her some sense of security. The biker's thoughts were clouded with a mix of emotions, his protective instincts still on high alert. He had kept her safe so far, but he knew the danger wasn't over. There were still threats lurking in the shadows, and he wasn't sure how long it would take before they'd come for her again. The sound of Steele's voice on the radio earlier rang in his ears. "We're not done yet. They'll be back for her." It was a grim reminder that no matter how far they ran, the danger was relentless. He had to find a way to get her out of this mess. They couldn't keep running forever. As they approached a remote cabin hidden deep in the woods, the biker slowed down, scanning the area for any signs of movement. The cabin was an old place, one he had used as a hideout in the past. It was secluded, isolated, and most importantly, safe, for now. The biker turned off the engine, letting the silence settle in. He helped the girl off the bike and led her inside. The cabin was small, but it had everything they needed. A wood stove in the corner crackled as it warmed the space, and the small kitchen was stocked with enough supplies to last a while. The biker didn't take his eyes off the girl as she slowly sat down by the fire, her hands still shaking, though she was trying to keep her composure. He could see the weight of everything she had been through in her eyes. "You're safe here," he said, his voice low but firm. The girl nodded, but didn't speak. She seemed exhausted, physically and mentally. The biker could see the toll the night had taken on her, the fear still fresh in her face, the exhaustion in her eyes. He wasn't sure how long they could stay here, but for now, it would have to do. "I'm not going anywhere," the biker added, kneeling down beside her. "You don't have to worry." The girl finally spoke, her voice small and fragile, like a whisper carried by the wind. "Why are you helping me?" Her question hung in the air, and the biker didn't answer immediately. He looked at her, his expression softening for the first time all night. "Because you deserve better than this," he said quietly. "Because no one should ever go through what you've been through." She didn't say anything else, but the look in her eyes told him everything he needed to know. She wasn't used to kindness, wasn't used to having someone fight for her, but she was starting to trust him. The biker stood up, moving toward the small window. He glanced outside, his eyes scanning the dark woods. His instincts were on edge, the need to stay vigilant always present. "We can't stay here long," he said, turning back to the girl. "They'll be looking for us. We need to keep moving." The girl looked up at him, her eyes wide with fear, but she didn't speak. She just nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. She had known from the moment she screamed for help that there would be consequences, that the men after her would stop at nothing to get her back. The biker had no illusions about the danger they were in. The men he had dealt with earlier weren't ordinary thugs. They were organized, ruthless, and they had no qualms about using violence to get what they wanted. He knew he couldn't let them find her again. He had to protect her at all costs. As he turned to prepare for their next move, a loud noise from outside caught his attention. It was distant at first, but it grew louder, unmistakable, the sound of engines, a convoy of motorcycles approaching fast. The biker's heart skipped a beat. Steele had warned him that they would come back, but he hadn't expected them so soon. He grabbed his gear and quickly turned to the girl. "Stay here. Lock the door behind me," he ordered, his voice firm. The girl nodded, her eyes wide with fear, but she didn't protest. She had learned quickly that there was no time for hesitation. The biker moved to the door, his hand on the handle. "I'll keep you safe," he promised, before stepping outside. The cold night air hit him like a slap in the face as he scanned the area. There were no immediate threats in sight, but the sound of the motorcycles was unmistakable. They were close, and they were coming fast. He had no time to waste. He needed to prepare for what was coming. The biker reached for his weapon, the one he had kept close for years, a weapon that had seen him through countless battles. He checked the magazine, making sure it was loaded. He had no idea how many men were out there, but he would make sure they wouldn't get any closer. He would protect the girl, even if it cost him his life. He moved into the trees, staying low, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. The sound of the engines grew louder, closer. They were getting close. He gritted his teeth, ready for whatever came next. They wouldn't take her without a fight. The biker crouched behind a thick tree, his eyes fixed on the approaching convoy of motorcycles. The rumbling of their engines grew louder, each passing second raising the tension in his chest. He could hear their laughter and shouting, the unmistakable sound of a group used to getting what they wanted. These men were the kind of people who didn't hesitate, who didn't care about right or wrong. They just took what they wanted, and right now, what they wanted was the girl. The biker clenched his fists around the weapon, his fingers wrapped tight around the handle. He had promised to protect her, and no one was taking her from him. Not tonight. The convoy slowed as it approached the cabin, the sound of the engines gradually fading as the bikers circled around the clearing. The biker's heart hammered in his chest as he watched them, his mind racing with plans and counterplans. There were 6 of them, maybe more, all wearing the same leather vests with the telltale patches of the motorcycle club. They were a small army, and the biker knew he was outnumbered. But he wasn't going to back down. He had a job to do. He tightened his grip on his weapon, ready for what was to come. One of the bikers, the largest of them all, dismounted first. His boots hit the ground with a thud, and he looked around, scanning the area. He was their leader, the one who had caused the biker the most trouble. The man's eyes locked onto the cabin, and a cruel smile spread across his face. "She's in there," the leader said, his voice low and menacing. "I can smell it." The biker's body tensed as he prepared himself. He knew that the leader was right. They had come for her, and they wouldn't leave until they had what they wanted. But the biker wasn't about to let that happen. He had a plan, and it had to work. He crouched lower, waiting for the perfect moment. The leader signaled to his men, and they all dismounted, forming a loose circle around the cabin. The biker's pulse quickened as they drew closer, each of them scanning the area for any sign of movement. The leader took a step forward, his boots crunching the leaves beneath his feet. "Come out, little girl," he called out, his voice full of malice. "We know you're in there. It's time to come home." The biker's muscles tensed as he watched, his mind calculating the distance, the timing. He knew he had to act fast. He waited for the right moment, his heart racing as the leader moved closer to the door. Just as the man reached for the handle, the biker sprang into action. With a sudden burst of speed, he charged toward the leader, tackling him to the ground before he could react. The leader grunted in pain as the biker's weight pinned him down, but the biker wasn't done yet. He pressed the blade of his weapon against the man's throat, his breath heavy and controlled. "Stay down," the biker growled, his voice cold with authority. "You won't touch her." The leader's eyes widened in shock as he tried to break free, but the biker held firm, his grip unrelenting. "Get off me," the leader snarled, struggling beneath him. "You think you can stop all of us?" The biker didn't answer. He didn't need to. He knew the odds, but he didn't care. He had a job to do, and he wasn't about to lose. As the leader continued to thrash beneath him, the biker heard the sound of footsteps behind him. He turned his head just in time to see 2 of the other men charging toward him. He didn't hesitate. He released the leader with a swift kick to the chest and spun around, meeting the 2 bikers head-on. The first one swung a heavy fist toward his face, but the biker was faster. He ducked, avoiding the punch, and landed a solid blow to the man's gut, knocking the air out of him. The second biker swung a chain toward him, but the biker was already on the move, sidestepping the attack and countering with a kick to the man's ribs. The biker didn't pause. He didn't have the luxury of time. He grabbed the chain from the second biker's hand and used it to knock him off balance, sending him crashing to the ground. The first biker scrambled to his feet, but the biker was already on him, landing a series of punches that left him dazed and stumbling. He was outnumbered, but he was faster, more focused, and he had one thing they didn't: determination. As the last biker lunged at him, the biker sidestepped once again, grabbing the man by the shoulders and throwing him against the nearby tree. The sound of bones hitting wood echoed in the clearing, and the man crumpled to the ground, unconscious. The biker stood tall, breathing heavily, his body covered in sweat and blood. He glanced over at the cabin, where the girl was still hiding. She was watching him, her eyes wide with fear and awe. He nodded toward her, signaling that it was safe. For now. The leader, still struggling on the ground, let out a furious yell. "You can't stop us," he spat, his voice full of rage. "We'll be back. You can't protect her forever." The biker didn't respond. He didn't need to. He had already won this battle. But he knew that the war was far from over. As the sound of sirens grew louder in the distance, the biker turned to the girl and beckoned her toward him. "Come on," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "We need to go. Now." The biker's eyes darted toward the distant sound of sirens growing louder. He knew they didn't have much time. The fight had been brutal, But the job wasn't done. The girl was still with him, and her safety was the only thing on his mind. He turned to her, his voice low but urgent. "We need to move, now." She nodded, her face pale, but her eyes held a spark of trust. She had seen him fight, seen him protect her, and though fear still clung to her, she knew he wasn't going to let anything happen to her. She stepped toward him, her small hand reaching for his, and they quickly moved toward the back of the cabin. The biker didn't look back at the downed men. He had no time to waste. The girl followed him into the dense woods behind the cabin, the path narrow and barely visible. He knew these woods well, having used them as escape routes in the past. But tonight, there was no room for mistakes. As they ran, the biker's thoughts raced. He could hear the sound of the sirens now, closer, louder, but it wasn't just the police he had to worry about. The club was still out there, and the leader's warning echoed in his mind. "We'll be back. You can't protect her forever." The girl stumbled slightly, her breath coming in quick gasps. The biker caught her, his arm going around her to steady her. "You okay?" he asked, his voice soft but firm. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with determination, despite the fear still gripping her. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice trembled. "We just need to get away from them." He nodded, tightening his grip on her hand as they continued through the trees. The woods were dark, the only light coming from the moon filtering through the canopy above. The sound of the sirens faded slightly, but the biker knew they couldn't afford to stop. He kept moving, his eyes scanning the area for any sign of danger. After what felt like an eternity of running, they reached a small clearing. The biker stopped, his body tense, his ears straining to catch any sounds in the distance. "Stay here," he whispered to the girl, stepping ahead to scan the area. He crouched low, peering through the trees, but saw nothing. The air was still, too still. He felt a chill creep up his spine. Something wasn't right. He turned back to the girl. "We need to keep moving. I don't trust this place." Just as he spoke, the sound of a distant engine caught his attention. It wasn't the police. This was a different sound, unmistakable. The growl of a motorcycle engine echoed through the trees. The biker's heart sank. "They found us." He turned to the girl, his eyes wide with urgency. "Run," he barked. "Now." She didn't hesitate, her legs carrying her as fast as she could go. The biker followed closely behind, his mind racing. The motorcycle engine grew louder, the sound of the bike cutting through the night like a predator stalking its prey. They weren't far behind. The biker pushed himself harder, forcing his body to move faster. The girl was already a few yards ahead, her pace determined despite her fear. But the biker knew the woods were dense, and they could easily get lost. He needed to get her to safety, fast. They reached the edge of the forest, where the trees began to thin out. In the distance, he could see headlights bouncing in the darkness, closing in. The biker's mind raced. They couldn't outrun them. He needed a plan, and fast. "Keep running," he yelled to the girl. "Don't stop." She glanced back at him, but her expression was one of resolve. She had seen the urgency in his eyes and knew there was no time to question him. The headlights were now so close that the biker could see the silhouettes of the riders. They were coming. He knew there was no way to fight them off with just his knife. His options were running out. But then he spotted it. A small cabin in the distance, barely visible in the moonlight. It was a long shot, but it was their only chance. "This way," he shouted, grabbing the girl's arm and pulling her toward the cabin. They ran harder, the sound of the motorcycles now deafening in their ears. As they reached the door, the biker tried the handle, but it was locked. Without hesitation, he kicked it in, the wood splintering under the force. Inside, the cabin was dark, abandoned for years, but it was solid. The biker pulled the girl inside, slamming the door shut behind them. The girl was breathing heavily, her face pale and covered in sweat. "We'll be okay," he said, though he wasn't sure if he believed it. He moved quickly to the window, peering out through the gaps in the wood. He could see the motorcycles now, their headlights casting long shadows as they stopped in front of the cabin. The bikers were getting off their bikes, their figures moving toward the door. The biker knew they didn't have much time. He turned to the girl. "Stay here," he said, his voice low and firm. He couldn't let them get in. He had to keep her safe, no matter the cost. As he prepared to face what was coming, he heard the sounds of the bikers outside, their boots heavy on the ground, their voices low and threatening. "They're coming," the biker muttered to himself. But he was ready. Whatever happened next, he wouldn't let them take her. The biker stood at the window, his breath coming in sharp, steady bursts as he watched the group of men outside. The sound of their boots on the wooden porch grew louder, each step a reminder that time was running out. The girl, still trembling in the corner, clutched her arms around her knees, her wide eyes filled with fear. The biker could hear the muffled voices of the men outside, their words indistinct but unmistakably threatening. "They won't give up," he muttered to himself. He had known that the fight was far from over, but seeing them so close, knowing how relentless they were, made everything seem so much more real. He turned away from the window and moved toward the girl. "Listen to me," he said in a low voice, crouching down beside her. "Stay down. Don't make a sound, no matter what happens." She nodded, her lips trembling but silent. He could see the fear in her eyes, but there was something else there, too. Trust. Trust that he would protect her. That was something he couldn't let go of, not when her life was on the line. The door rattled as someone outside tried to turn the handle. The biker didn't move a muscle. He waited, watching the door like a hawk waiting for its prey. He knew what he had to do. The group outside didn't know what they were up against. They thought they could just walk in, take the girl, and leave. But they didn't know him, and they didn't know what he would do to protect her. He moved quickly, silently, over to the old dresser in the corner. He pulled open a drawer, his fingers brushing across the cool metal of the gun he had hidden inside. It had been years since he had used it, but tonight, he might not have any choice. The sound of the door rattling again snapped him out of his thoughts. The men outside were getting impatient. He could hear them whispering to each other, their words growing more urgent. He had no time left. The door suddenly flew open with a loud crash, and the biker sprang into action. He grabbed the gun, checked the chamber, and moved toward the door. His body tensed, ready for the fight. He could see the silhouettes of the men in the doorway, their figures dark against the fading light outside. They hadn't expected him to be ready. "Get out of here," he shouted, his voice cold with authority, his finger tightening on the trigger. But the men didn't hesitate. One of them lunged at him, a knife glinting in the dim light. The biker reacted instinctively, sidestepping the attack and slamming the butt of the gun into the man's chest. The man stumbled back, gasping for air. But there were more of them. The leader, the same one who had threatened him before, stepped forward with a sneer. "You can't stop us, biker. You're just one man. What are you going to do? Shoot us all?" The biker didn't flinch. His eyes never left the leader's face as he adjusted his grip on the gun. "I'll do whatever it takes to keep her safe." The leader laughed, a harsh, mocking sound that echoed in the small cabin. "You think you can take all of us on?" he asked, his voice dripping with arrogance. But the biker wasn't listening anymore. His focus was entirely on the girl, who was still huddled in the corner, her eyes locked on the scene unfolding before her. The biker's heart ached. He couldn't let them take her. Not after everything she had been through. The men moved closer, circling around him. He could feel the tension in the air, the anticipation of a fight that was about to explode. But the biker was ready. The leader made the first move, charging at him with a fist raised. The biker dodged, slamming the gun into the man's side, sending him crashing into the wall. One of the other men grabbed a pipe and swung it at the biker, but the biker was faster. He ducked and drove his shoulder into the man's gut, sending him sprawling to the ground. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, the intensity of the moment taking over. But there were still too many of them. The leader got back up, his face twisted in fury. "You're dead, biker," he growled. The biker didn't have time to respond. The leader pulled out a gun of his own, aiming it at him. The biker's eyes widened. He had no choice. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the spare magazine he had tucked away, slamming it into his gun. He had one shot to take them all down before they got to the girl. The leader fired first, the sound of the shot ringing in the small cabin. The biker ducked, the bullet grazing his shoulder. He gritted his teeth, pain flaring up in his arm, but he didn't stop. He aimed and fired, the bullet hitting the leader in the chest. The man staggered back, dropping his gun as he fell to the ground, blood staining his shirt. The other men froze, their faces filled with shock. They hadn't expected this. The biker stood tall, his gun raised, his body tense. "Leave now," he said, his voice steady and full of authority. The men didn't move, not immediately, but the fear in their eyes was undeniable. Finally, One of them turned and bolted out the door, followed by the others. The biker didn't lower his gun until the last man was gone. He stood there for a moment, his chest heaving with the weight of the battle, before turning to the girl. She was staring at him, wide-eyed, but she wasn't scared anymore. She had seen what he was capable of. "It's over," he said, his voice soft. "You're safe now." She nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. But there was something else there too. Relief. They had made it through this, together. The biker knew the danger wasn't truly gone, but for now, they had won. He walked over to her, helping her stand. "Let's go," he said. "We're not done yet, but we'll keep moving. I'll get you out of this." And with that, they left the cabin behind, disappearing into the night. The road ahead was uncertain, but the biker knew one thing for sure. He would do whatever it took to keep her safe. The biker and the girl moved quickly through the dark, the night pressing in on them from every side. The weight of their situation hung heavily in the air, but there was something else too, a sense of determination that refused to let go. The danger was far from over, but for the first time in what felt like forever, they had a chance to breathe. The biker's hand stayed firmly on the girl's shoulder as they moved through the woods, his senses alert to every sound around them. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the ground. They hadn't gone far when the sound of motorcycles reached their ears again, distant but unmistakable. The biker cursed under his breath, his grip tightening. "They're still on us," he muttered, his mind racing for a solution. The girl, her face pale, turned to him, her wide eyes filled with fear. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The biker's gaze softened as he looked at her. "We keep moving. We don't stop, no matter what. They won't stop until they get you, but I'm not letting that happen." Her eyes met his, and for a moment, he saw something in them, something that made him realize just how far they had come. She trusted him. She was scared, but she trusted him. The thought hit him like a ton of bricks. He had to protect her. He didn't know how long they could keep running, but he couldn't stop. Not now. Not ever. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Stay close," he said, his voice low and urgent. They continued moving, the sound of the motorcycles growing louder as they drew closer. The biker's heart raced, but he didn't allow himself to show any fear. He had to stay strong, for her. As they pushed through the trees, the girl stumbled, tripping over a branch in the dark. The biker was at her side in an instant, catching her before she could fall. "You okay?" he asked, his voice softer than before. She nodded, her face flushed from the exertion, but she didn't speak. She was trying to keep up, trying to be strong. And he was proud of her. "Good," he said. "Keep going. We're almost there." The distant sound of engines grew closer still. The biker's mind worked quickly, scanning the area for a place to hide. He spotted a small cabin in the distance, barely visible through the trees, its silhouette dark against the sky. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. "Over there," he said, pointing toward the cabin. "We'll make a stand there." The girl nodded and ran ahead, her determination now matching his. The biker followed closely, every step bringing them closer to the cabin. But just as they neared the building, the sound of the motorcycles reached a deafening roar. The biker's eyes widened. "They're here," he muttered. He pushed the girl toward the door, his mind racing. They didn't have much time. He shoved open the door, pulling the girl inside, and slammed it shut behind them. The cabin was dark, but the biker's eyes adjusted quickly. He moved toward the window, peering through the cracks to see the bikers pull into the clearing. They were here. The girl huddled behind him, her body shaking with fear. The biker turned to her. "Listen to me," he said, his voice low and intense. "I need you to stay out of sight. Don't make a sound, and don't come out unless I tell you to." She nodded, her face pale but determined. He could see the fear in her eyes, but she trusted him. She would do as he asked. The biker moved to the back of the cabin, his senses on high alert as he listened for the sounds of the bikers. The door outside rattled as one of them tried to open it. The biker's hand instinctively went to the knife at his side. He didn't know how many men were outside, but he had to be ready for anything. He waited for a few more moments, his heart pounding in his chest, before the door finally crashed open. The bikers stormed into the cabin, their boots thundering against the wooden floor. The biker stood his ground, his body tense and ready for the fight. "We don't want any trouble," the leader of the group said, stepping forward. "Just give her to us, and we'll let you go." The biker's gaze locked onto the leader's eyes, his voice cold and unwavering. I'm not giving her to anyone. Not now, not ever. The leader sneered. You think you can stop us? You're just one man. You haven't been paying attention, the biker said, his voice steady. Because I'm not just one man. I'm her protector, and I'll fight you all if I have to. The leader took a step forward, his hand reaching for the knife at his side. The biker's eyes narrowed. He wasn't about to let them get close. Stay back, he warned. But the leader didn't listen. With a sudden move, he lunged toward the biker, his knife flashing in the dim light. The biker dodged, narrowly avoiding the blade, and countered with a punch too. The leader's jaw. The leader staggered back, but he quickly regained his footing. The biker lunged at him again, this time with more force, his body slamming into the leader's chest. They crashed into the floor, the sound of their struggle echoing through the cabin. The girl stayed hidden, her hands pressed against her mouth to stifle her fear. She could hear the fight, could feel the tension in the air, but she didn't move. The biker wasn't going to let them win. Not now. Not ever. The fight continued in a blur of motion. The biker and the leader wrestled on the cabin floor, each trying to gain the upper hand. The air was thick with tension, the sound of fists hitting flesh and the scrape of boots against wood filling the small space. The biker was relentless, his body trained for combat, his focus sharp despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. But the leader was strong too, his movements fueled by rage and desperation. With a grunt, the biker pushed the leader off him and scrambled to his feet. His body ached, but he didn't have time to feel it. The door had been kicked open, and more men were pouring into the cabin. The biker's eyes darted around, calculating his next move. The girl was still hiding, her presence barely a whisper in the background. He couldn't afford to lose his focus. The men were closing in. The biker's mind worked quickly. He needed to hold them off, buy some time, and get the girl out of there. His hand brushed against the nearby table, his fingers brushing over the familiar feel of a heavy object. Without thinking, he grabbed it, a large metal wrench, and swung it at the nearest man. The man barely had time to react before the wrench struck him square in the jaw, sending him crashing to the floor. The biker didn't wait to see if the man would get up. He turned and faced the others, his eyes scanning for weaknesses. The leader, now back on his feet, charged again, but the biker was ready. He dodged the attack and grabbed the leader's arm, twisting it behind his back. The leader grunted in pain, but the biker didn't let go. He slammed the man into the wall, the force rattling the cabin. The sound of the struggle was deafening, but the biker's focus remained sharp. His only priority was the girl. The men around him were distractions, and they wouldn't stop him from getting her out. He shoved the leader aside, taking a quick glance toward the girl. She was still there, frozen in place, but she was watching him. Her eyes were filled with fear, but there was something else there too, trust. The biker took a deep breath and called out to her. Get to the back. Now, he shouted, his voice commanding. Without hesitation, the girl ran, her footsteps quick and light as she disappeared into the back room of the cabin. The biker fought on, taking down one man after another with swift, calculated moves. His mind was on autopilot now, each punch, each kick, each move designed to protect the girl and keep her safe. The leader was still standing, his eyes burning with anger. He lunged at the biker again, but this time, the biker was ready. He sidestepped the attack and landed a solid punch to the leader's ribs. The leader staggered back, gasping for air, but the biker didn't let up. He grabbed the man by the throat, lifting him off the ground. I told you. The biker growled, his voice low and dangerous. She's not going anywhere. The leader's eyes widened in shock, his face turning red as he struggled to breathe. The biker's grip tightened for a moment longer before he shoved the man to the floor, his body landing with a heavy thud. The cabin was silent for a moment, the only sound the panting breaths of the biker and the remaining men. The leader lay on the ground, clutching his throat, while the other men hesitated, unsure of what to do next. The biker's gaze shifted from one man to the next. He could see the fear in their eyes now. They knew they were outmatched. You've lost, the biker said, his voice steady. Get out. Now. The men didn't hesitate this time. One by one, they turned and fled, their footsteps heavy as they rushed out of the cabin. The biker didn't watch them leave. He didn't need to. His focus was entirely on the girl. He walked quickly toward the back of the cabin, where she was waiting, her face a mix of relief and lingering fear. She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "It's over, right?" she asked, her voice quiet. The biker nodded. "It's over," he said, his voice calm but firm. He reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're safe now." The girl's face softened, and for the first time that night, she allowed herself to relax. She gave him a small, grateful smile. The biker stood there for a moment, watching her. He could feel the weight of the battle lifting off his shoulders, but he knew they weren't out of the woods yet. The girl had been through so much, and there was still more to face. But for now, she was safe, and that was all that mattered. He turned toward the door, his mind already calculating their next move. He had to keep her safe, no matter the cost. "Let's go," he said, his voice steady. "We've still got a long road ahead." The girl nodded and followed him, the two of them stepping out into the night, ready for whatever came next. They had survived this fight, but the war was far from over. But as long as they had each other, they could face anything. And together, they would keep running, no matter how far they had to go. The night was still as the biker and the girl moved further into the wilderness. The cabin was now behind them, hidden in the trees, its quiet echo a reminder of the fight they had just survived. The sounds of the motorcycles were distant now, their engines swallowed by the vastness of the woods. But the biker knew they weren't safe yet. There was no such thing as safe when you were constantly running, when there were enemies hunting you. The girl, walking beside him, was quiet, her small frame moving swiftly through the underbrush. Her face was still pale, the weight of what had happened still holding her down, but there was something in her step now, a resolve that hadn't been there before. The biker glanced over at her, his eyes softening. She had been through so much already, and yet here she was, still walking, still moving forward. He admired that about her. She was stronger than she realized. They had walked for what felt like hours, the night growing colder, the shadows stretching longer. The biker wasn't sure where they were heading, but he knew they couldn't stop now. They needed to find a place to rest, a place to regroup, and they needed to stay off the main roads. The last thing they needed was to run into more of the club members, or worse, police who had been alerted by the commotion earlier. "We need to keep moving," he muttered under his breath, glancing back toward the path they had come from. The girl, her face set in determination, nodded. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice small but steady. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But we'll figure it out. One step at a time." She didn't question him, didn't ask any more about the plan. She just kept walking, following him deeper into the woods. The biker's mind raced as he thought about their next move. He needed to get her out of this mess, but he couldn't do it alone. Steele and the others might be able to help, but they couldn't be counted on forever. They would need to get somewhere safe, somewhere that the club wouldn't think to look. A small town, perhaps, somewhere off the radar. As he led the girl forward, the sounds of the forest seemed to quiet, the rustling leaves and occasional bird call the only noise breaking the silence. The path was narrow, winding through thick trees and brush. Every so often, he glanced behind them, making sure they weren't being followed. The last thing they needed was another confrontation. He couldn't afford to let his guard down. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden noise, footsteps. Faint, but definitely there. His hand instinctively went to the knife at his belt, but before he could react, the girl grabbed his arm. "What is it?" she whispered, her voice filled with fear. "I don't know," he replied, his voice low. "Stay close. Stay quiet." The biker crouched low, pulling the girl with him as they moved silently into the cover of the trees. He could hear the footsteps drawing closer now, not far away, and his senses were on high alert. Whoever it was, they were too close for comfort. The biker's heart raced as he tried to stay still, blending into the shadows. The girl's breathing was shallow beside him, her small body trembling against his. The footsteps paused, and for a moment, everything was still. The biker held his breath, praying that whoever was out there wouldn't see them. Then, to his relief, the footsteps moved away, disappearing into the distance. The biker let out a quiet sigh, his grip loosening on the knife. "It's okay," he whispered, looking at the girl. She nodded, her face still pale, but now with a hint of relief. "I think we're good," he said, standing slowly and glancing around once more. They couldn't afford to stay here for long. They had to keep moving. The biker started walking again, but this time, he moved with even more caution. His eyes were scanning the woods constantly, his body tense as he listened for any more signs of danger. The girl was silent beside him, but he could feel her clinging to him for reassurance. The further they went, the more the weight of the night seemed to press down on him. The fight, the chase, it was all starting to take its toll. But he couldn't show it. He had to stay strong for her. They walked for what felt like hours, the cold air biting at their skin as the night wore on. Eventually, they reached a small clearing, a narrow road cutting through the trees. The biker stopped, scanning the area for any signs of danger. The road seemed empty, but they couldn't take chances. He looked at the girl, her eyes wide with uncertainty. "We're going to cross this road, then head for that hill over there," he said, pointing to a rise in the distance. "It's a little out of the way, but it's better than staying on this road." The girl nodded, her face serious, and they moved forward, cautiously crossing the road. As they reached the hill, the biker turned back to check the road once more. No sign of anyone. He was starting to feel like they might be in the clear. They reached the top of the hill and found a small, hidden spot behind a cluster of trees. The biker helped the girl down, his legs aching from the long walk. "This will do for now," he said, setting down his pack. The girl sat down beside him, her back against a tree, looking up at him with a quiet, grateful expression. "Thank you," she said softly. The biker looked down at her, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Don't mention it," he said. "You're safe, and that's what matters." The night was far from over, but for the first time in hours, they could rest. The road ahead was uncertain, but they would face it together, one step at a time. The night air had grown colder, the chill seeping into their bones as they huddled together at the top of the hill. The biker kept a watchful eye on the horizon, his senses on high alert, but for now, the world seemed quiet. The only sounds were the wind rustling through the trees and the soft breathing of the girl beside him. He could feel her anxiety, even if she was trying her best to hide it. The girl had been through so much, and though she was trying to be brave, the fear was still there, lurking beneath the surface. "How much longer do you think we can keep running?" she asked, her voice soft, almost drowned out by the wind. The biker didn't look at her immediately. He kept his eyes on the landscape, but his mind was elsewhere. He had thought about this moment a lot, but now that it was here, the answer wasn't as simple as he had hoped. He didn't want to lie to her, but at the same time, he needed to keep her from panicking. "I don't know," he said finally. "We'll keep moving, keep finding places to hide. We'll make it through, but we have to stay ahead of them." The girl nodded, but there was doubt in her eyes. She didn't say anything more, just turned her gaze to the ground, staring at the leaves and dirt beneath her. He knew what she was thinking. The reality of their situation was sinking in. They were constantly on the move, always looking over their shoulders. It was a life of survival, and that was no way to live. "Why are they after me?" she asked after a long silence. The biker looked at her then, his heart heavy. He had been dreading this conversation, but it was inevitable. She had to know the truth, even if it meant shattering the last of her innocence. "Because you saw something you shouldn't have," he said, his voice low. "Something they'll kill to keep hidden." The girl's eyes widened, and she sat up straighter. "What do you mean? What did I see?" The biker hesitated. He had been keeping the details from her to protect her, but it seemed like she was ready for the truth. "The people who are after you, they're dangerous. They deal in things that no one should ever have to deal with. You got caught up in something you didn't ask for, and now they want to make sure you can't tell anyone what you saw." The girl shook her head, confusion clouding her face. "I don't understand. What did I see?" The biker looked away, taking a deep breath. He wasn't sure how to explain it without making her even more afraid. But he had to try. "I don't know the full details, but I know they'll stop at nothing to get you. And they won't stop until they know for sure that you're not going to talk." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle between them. The girl sat there, her small hands clenched in her lap, her mind racing. "But I don't even remember anything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what they think I saw." The biker's gaze softened, and he put a hand on her shoulder. "I know, but they don't care about that. They just want to make sure you can't tell anyone what happened." The girl fell silent, processing the gravity of the situation. Her face was pale, and the fear that had been simmering in her eyes was now fully visible. The biker's heart went out to her. She was just a kid, she didn't deserve this. He could see the questions swirling in her mind, but there was one question she hadn't asked yet, one he knew was coming. "Are they going to kill me?" she finally asked, her voice trembling. The biker's heart clenched. He had been hoping she wouldn't ask, but now that she had, he couldn't lie to her. If they get the chance, yes, he said softly. But I won't let that happen. Not as long as I'm breathing. She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face, looking for any sign that he was lying. But she found nothing but sincerity. He meant it. He would die before he let anything happen to her. The girl's eyes welled up with tears, and she quickly wiped them away, trying to stay strong. She had already been through too much, and now the weight of the truth was too much to bear. The biker could see how hard she was fighting to hold it together, and it made his chest ache. He hated seeing her like this, but he knew she had to understand. You're not alone, he said, his voice firm. I'm with you. We'll get through this. Together. She looked at him for a moment, her eyes filled with uncertainty, but then she nodded slowly. I believe you, she said quietly. The biker gave her a small, reassuring smile. Good. Now, we need to keep moving. He stood up and offered her his hand, and after a moment of hesitation, she took it. The two of them began walking again, the darkness of the woods stretching out before them. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, the biker felt like they had a fighting chance. They didn't have all the answers, but they had each other. And for now, that was enough. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a soft orange glow over the landscape as the biker and the girl moved steadily down the narrow dirt road. The night had been long, filled with anxiety and uncertainty, but now there was a slight sense of calm in the air. The woods were quiet, the only sounds the rustling of leaves underfoot and the occasional call of a bird in the distance. They had covered a lot of ground since the cabin, moving further away from the chaos, but the biker knew they weren't completely out of danger yet. Every step they took was another step toward safety, but he also knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The girl walked beside him, her head slightly down, her face still reflecting the exhaustion and fear she had been carrying for so long. But there was something different in the way she carried herself now, a quiet strength that had begun to grow in her. She wasn't the same terrified child he had met days ago. She had learned to survive. The biker couldn't help but feel a sense of pride for her, even though he knew she had been forced to grow up far too fast. He glanced over at her, trying to gauge where her mind was. You doing okay? He asked, his voice soft but steady. She nodded without looking at him. I'm fine, she replied, though her voice betrayed a hint of weariness. Just tired. He could see that. They both were. But they had come this far, and they were going to keep going. The girl had her moments of doubt, but she was holding on to the one thing that had kept them both moving. Hope. They walked for miles, the road winding through open fields and thick woods, before the biker finally spoke again. There's a small town up ahead, he said. We'll rest there for a while. Maybe even try to figure out our next move. The girl looked up at him then, her eyes flicking toward the horizon. Do you think it'll be safe? She asked, her voice tentative. The biker hesitated. The truth was, he didn't know. No place would ever feel truly safe until they were out of the clutches of the men after her. But for now, it was their best shot. I hope so, he said quietly. But we'll stay cautious. We won't stay long. The town, when they finally arrived, was small, nestled between the hills, its streets quiet in the early morning light. There were a few houses scattered along the main road, some old stores, and a diner that looked like it had been around for decades. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The biker knew they could blend in here, at least for a little while. They made their way toward the diner, the girl walking a few paces behind him. The biker kept his eyes on their surroundings, his instincts never allowing him to relax completely. He led her inside, and the smell of fresh coffee and bacon filled the air. A few early risers sat at the counter, nursing cups of coffee and reading the morning paper. The diner was small, the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and everyone's business was common knowledge. As soon as they walked in, the waitress behind the counter looked up, giving them a long, curious glance. The biker met her eyes, giving her a polite nod. 2 coffees, please, he said, keeping his tone neutral, careful not to give away too much. The waitress didn't ask any questions, just nodded and began to pour their drinks. He took a seat in the corner, pulling the girl into the booth with him. She slid in next to him, her body visibly relaxing for the first time in days. It wasn't much, but for a brief moment, they could pretend they were just another pair of travelers, stopping for a break. We'll stay here for the day, the biker said softly to the girl. Get some rest. We need to figure out what's next. She nodded again, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. It was hard for her to believe that they were safe. She had lived in constant fear for so long that she found it hard to trust that anything could be okay. The biker watched her closely, his heart heavy with guilt. She had been through more than anyone her age should have ever experienced, and he couldn't help but wonder how much longer it would be before the past caught up with them. But for now, they had a moment. A brief respite. What will we do once we leave here? The girl asked, her voice soft. The biker took a long sip of his coffee, thinking for a moment before answering. We'll keep moving. Stay off the main roads. There's always a chance they'll catch up with us, but we can't stop running. The girl looked up at him, her eyes tired but determined. You'll keep protecting me, right? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The biker met her gaze, his face softening. I'll protect you with everything I've got, he said, his voice unwavering. I swear it. A silence fell between them, the weight of his words hanging in the air. They didn't speak for a while, both lost in their own thoughts, the warm hum of the diner providing a strange comfort. Eventually, the girl spoke again, her voice steadier now. Thank you, she said, her eyes meeting his. For everything. The biker didn't say anything at first. He didn't need to. His actions spoke louder than words ever could. He gave her a small, reassuring smile, and she smiled back. In that moment, despite the fear, despite the unknown future, there was a sense of peace between them. A sense that they were in this together, and nothing else mattered. As they finished their coffee and prepared to leave, the biker's thoughts turned to what came next. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, he felt ready to face it. Together, they could take on whatever was coming. And with that thought, he stood up, offering his hand to the girl. Let's go, he said quietly. And as they walked out into the light of the new day, the biker couldn't help but feel, for the first time in what felt like forever, that they had a chance. They were still running, but they were no longer alone.